early with you so you can start getting more familiar with the process. We will reserve some time at the end of the training for questions, but we do encourage you to please submit questions throughout the presentation, whether by raising your hand or submitting your questions in the chat, and we will provide responses. If you have any questions that you want to take, you don't want to ask today, but you want to submit the questions, please send them via our mailbox, and I will copy and paste that information in the chat momentarily. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sue Chang, a compliance team member. She will provide an overview of the quarterly report requirements, and she will also provide guidance on reporting program income, administrative expenses, tips, and best practices to remember when you're completing your reporting. She will after she's finished, she will turn it over to Grace Mahaffey. Grace will show you how to complete the template and give you some really good example of what Sue highlighted in our overview. After Grace, Jay will come in and he will Jay Flowers will demo the actual portal on how to complete your quarterly submission. I will stop talking and turn it over to Sue. And again, if you do have questions, please do not hesitate to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sue, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayma, and thank you for joining in today's quarterly reporting training. I will provide an overview of the quarterly reporting requirements, and we'll cover some of the data elements on the quarterly report. I'm going to start with the first slide on what is quarterly reporting. The SSBCI Capital Program Guidance sets out reporting requirements for jurisdictions that receive SSBCI funds. To facilitate the quarterly reporting requirement, Treasury has created a customized quarterly reporting template for each jurisdiction to submit in the SSBCI reporting portal. The customized template contains pre-populated data such as program name, program administrator, total potential allocation, and cumulative dispersed amount. And if any of the pre-populated data is incorrect or incomplete, please let us know before you submit your quarterly report. There are 6 sections to the quarterly report template. They are program funds expended, obligated, or transfer, also referred to as EOT, for each approved program loans and investments, EOT for administrative costs, program income earned, cap charge-off against the federal contribution to the cap reserve funds, and lastly, SSBCI funds budgeted for each contracted entity for the life of the program. We encourage jurisdictions to review the capital program guidelines on EOT requirements, as well as the capital program guidance on specific data to report. We will move on to the next slide on when our quarterly report is due to Treasury. Our quarterly report must be submitted to Treasury 30 days after the end of the quarterly reporting period. So for Q1 reporting, the portal will open for submission on April 1st and will close on April 30th. We will send out email reminders to all participating jurisdictions that are required to report at the beginning of the submission window, and we'll send additional reminders prior to the submission deadline. We'll move on to the next slide on who needs to submit a quarterly report. Jurisdiction must submit to Treasury a quarterly report for the first full calendar quarter following your signed allocation agreement with Treasury. So for jurisdictions that sign the allocation agreement in Q4 of 2023, your first quarterly reporting requirement starts in Q1. And for jurisdictions that sign the allocation agreement in Q1, you will not need to submit your quarterly report until the second quarter. The Q1 templates are currently available in the portal for download for all jurisdictions that are required to submit by April 30th. Jurisdictions can upload the completed template anytime during the submission window. We will be going over the reporting template and submission process later in the presentation, as Mehmet said earlier. We will move to the next slide on EOT. In this slide, we want to clarify reporting guidelines on EOT. The first point I want to clarify is that only SSBCI funds are reported on the quarterly report, so should not include private capital. Starting on the left, we have for expanded. For transactions to be considered expanded, SSBCI funds must be dispersed to a specific borrower or lender as part of a set aside to cover loan guarantee, collateral deposit, or purchase participation for a specific transaction that has closed. For VC equity transaction, SSBCI funds must be directly invested in a specific business. For example, in a loan guarantee transaction, the amount set aside to cover the guarantee, typically held in a reserve account, can be reported as expended when the loan closes. Similarly, in a collateral support transaction, the set aside amount, typically held in a depository bank or trustee bank, can be reported as expended when the loan closes. And remember, for direct equity and VC fund transaction, in order to be considered expended, SSBCI funds should be invested in a specific business. We'll move on to middle section for obligated. For a transaction to be considered obligated, SSBCI funds must be committed, pledged, or promised in writing to a lender or borrower as part of a loan participation to a specific borrower. As the loan has not contractually closed. Likewise, for an LGP and collateral support, SSBCI funds must be a commitment to cover guarantees and collateral deposit, but the loan has not contractually closed. For direct equity investment to be considered obligated, there should be signed investment agreement and the funds have not been received by the business. For VC fund investment, funds must be committed, pledged, or promised in writing as part of VC and fund investment agreement, and the obligation is at the fund level. And the last column, we have transfer. The main thing to note for transfer is that there should be a documented need to fund a loan transaction or investment or to pay for allowable expenses. Okay, we will move on to the next slide on reporting program EOT and administrative costs. As indicated earlier, jurisdictions must report program funds EOT and EOT for administrative costs. Program funds EOT should only include loans, investment, and funds to be used for 171 amounts for services for portfolio companies. All other expenses are considered administrative and should be reported in the administrative costs field. Administrative costs should not be included in the program funds EOT. Okay, we will move on to the next slide on reporting operating expenses in a VC fund commitment. VC operating expenses should be reported as administrative costs in a VC fund transaction. The total budgeted operating expenses should be subtracted from the total commitment amount, and the expended VC operating expenses should be reported as administrative EOT. For example, if a jurisdiction makes a SSBCI fund commitment of $1 million to a VC fund, it includes 171 fees of $171,000 and operating expense budget of $36. In addition, VC fund incurred that is expended operating expenses of $5,000 during the quarter. For quarterly reporting, the jurisdiction should report $964,000 as program EOT and $5,000 as EOT for admin costs. Okay, we'll move on to next slide on reporting program income. Program income received by the jurisdiction that is directly generated by SSBCI supported activity or earned as a result of SSBCI funds during the program period should be reported in the quarterly report. Likewise, interest earned on SSBCI funds not invested or lent to small businesses count as program income and should also be reported in the quarterly report. And when income is generated by an approved program that includes non-SSBCI funds, jurisdictions should report only the pro rata share of the income that is attributable to SSBCI. For example, in a program that is comprised of 60% non-SSBCI sources and 40% SSBCI funds, the jurisdiction should only report 40%, which is the SSBCI generated amount as program income on the quarterly report. And lastly, for jurisdictions that have program income earned but have not been reported in the prior quarter, may report the prior quarter income as an adjustment on the quarterly report. Next slide, please. And this slide will discuss offsetting administrative costs with program income. Jurisdictions may offset administrative expenses with program income, provided that there's sufficient program income for the offset. Program income and admin costs should both be reduced by the amount of the offset as shown on this slide. In this example, in Q4, the jurisdiction used $250,000 of program income to offset administrative costs. The $250,000 should be shown on both program income line and admin line on the quarterly report and should not be netted against the Q4 program income. We will move on to the next slide on recycled funds. SSBCI funds are only considered recycled funds once the funds are redeployed into new loans or investment. Until the funds are redeployed, jurisdictions should hold any returned SSBCI invested capital. For example, if a jurisdiction received proceeds of $120,000 made up of $100,000 return of investment and $20,000 as interest on convertible debt, the $100,000 return of investment should only be reported as recycled funds once the funds are redeployed into new loans or investment. The $20,000 interest should be reported as program income when it is earned or received. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide on adjustment to quarterly report. For jurisdictions that are reporting for the first time, you should not have any adjustments to your report, but you may have adjustments in the future quarters. Acceptable reasons for an adjustment include removing an obligated loan or investment that's no longer expected to close, correcting a clerical error, such as transposition of a number or one directed by SSBCI. If your jurisdiction has larger adjustments or swings from one quarter to another, we recommend letting us know before you submit your quarterly report. And if you have adjustments to report, please provide a brief explanation for the adjustment in the additional information section of the report. Next slide, please. Reporting for jurisdictions are reporting for the first time and have EOT from a quarter prior to their first quarterly reporting period, jurisdictions should report the prior quarter activity along with the current quarter in the current quarter field. For example, if a jurisdiction executed the allocation agreement on October 1st of 2023 and expended funds in the amount of $100 in the quarter, and Q1 of 2024, which is the first full calendar quarter following the execution of the allocation agreement, the jurisdiction expended additional funds in the amount of $200. For Q1 reporting, the jurisdiction should input $300 in the current quarter input field. Another example would be if a jurisdiction has program income from the quarter prior to the required reporting period, the jurisdiction should report the prior quarter income along with the current quarter in the current quarter field of the quarter report. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, jurisdictions may unenroll a closed transaction or use administrative expenses if a jurisdiction or treasury identifies a non-compliant use of SSBCI funds. However, Treasury's written approval is needed before jurisdictions can unenroll a non-compliant transaction. If a jurisdiction identifies a non-compliant use of SSBCI funds, the jurisdiction should notify Treasury prior to taking any unenrollment and replenishment action, even if the transaction has not been reported to Treasury. Okay, we'll continue the next slide on unenrollment. Until the unenrollment process has been completed, jurisdictions should use the modified certification on the use of funds when submitting your quarterly report. And we ask that jurisdictions provide a brief description on the potential non-compliant transaction. We provide a sample template in the reporting portal, which can be found that jurisdictions are required to use if they're certified, if you're making a modified certification. After the unenrollment process is completed, jurisdictions can report the unenrolled SSBCI amount as an adjustment on the quarterly report. This should only be done when the unenrollment process is complete and the supporting documentation has been provided to Treasury. We advise jurisdictions to reach out to your outreach manager to discuss any potential non-compliant transaction. Okay, move on to the next slide on quarterly reporting tips. Okay, so on this slide, we put together a few quarterly reporting tips that you may find helpful when you complete your report. When filling out the template, if a field on the quarterly report turns red, please review the associated alert, and fix any errors. Do not submit, please do not submit the quarterly report if any of the fields turns red. The sum of the cumulative quarter-to-date program EOT plus the cumulative quarter admin cost should not exceed the total disbursed amount. If it does, the field will turn red. And another one is if you're using program income to offset administrative expenses, we put the full amount of the program income used to offset the administrative costs in the adjustment field. Please do not net the two amounts. If you have adjustments, please provide a brief, concise explanation for the adjustments. Okay, I think I have my last slide on accessing the quarterly report. I'll make this brief since Jay will be going over different level of access in his administration later. I just want to highlight a couple of things. So the most restrictive role is the account administrator, and the least restrictive is the account representative role. The authorized representative role can view, download the template, upload a completed report, and is the only user who can certify and submit report. If the user does not have an authorized representative role, an error message will appear preventing the user from submitting the report. Now this concludes my section of the presentation, and I will now pass it over to Grace. We'll go over how to complete the template. Thank you.